This episode is brought to you by Hasa. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the bottom feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this Best of Bob Lowry, Bob Lowry is going to talk to you about borates in your swimming pool and how they can be highly effective in preventing algae and allowing you to use less chlorine in your pool. And there's no one better than Bob Lowry to talk about borates in your pool, since he was the premier expert on the use of borates in swimming pools. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy coaching program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support from me. I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. The borate thing we talk about all the time, and I think one of the things that we have to emphasize is that adding borates is not a magic pill to your pool or a magic bullet. So there's things you have to do still after you add the borates to the water, like balance the water, check the LSI. And I think the impression that people get is that when they add the borates to the pool, they're done with their pool care at that point.
Yeah. Well, and I wrote a technical bulletin about that too. Don't just throw some borates in your pool and think your problems are over. And that's exactly the way I felt about it, is that, people are saying, well, I put some borates in, I won't have algae anymore. And it just isn't true. You have to still maintain the pool, and there's some things you need to do. And, not the least of which is to keep the right amount of chlorine in the pool. You need to keep the chlorine level either 5%, if you're going to use borate, and you keep the level of chlorine in at 5% of CYA. So you need to do that. And with a minimum of 2 parts per million, because people say, well, just keep the chlorine level or the CYA level at 20. Then I can keep, 1 part per million of chlorine in the pool. And that's not the way it works. You still need the minimum still needs to be 2.
And I think you wrote about that as far as your cyanuric acid level. Didn't you write that, 30 parts protects 3 parts per million, 50 parts per million protects 5 parts per million?
You need about 10 parts per million for each 1 part per million of chlorine that you're going to keep in the pool. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to put 4 parts or 5 parts per million of chlorine in the pool, you need 40 or 50 parts per million of chlorine.
Of cyanuric acid, you mean, right?
I mean, of cyanuric acid. Excuse me.
And I've done tests before with my pool where I kept it at 10 or 20 parts per million, and it doesn't hold chlorine for nothing at that level.
No, it doesn't. And actually, the problem may be the test itself. The manufacturers that I checked with, 20 parts per million is about the bare minimum that they can accurately say it's okay. And even that level is plus or minus 20%. When you think about it, if you're measuring 15, it's 20% of that. It may be only 10 or 12 instead of 15 like you think it is. I think keeping a low level of cyanuric acid, the minimum level of cyanuric acid you ever need is 20 and probably 30. But if you're going to put 2 to 4 parts per million of chlorine in the pool, you're going to need 20 to 40 cyanuric acid.
And so with the borates in the pool, this is a question I get asked a lot. Is it harder to lower the pH and alkalinity once you have the borates at 50 parts per million? Are you going to use more acid to do that? Because it is a buffer.
Well, yes, actually, the pH won't go up as fast or as high, but once it does go high, it'll take you almost twice as much to get it back down. So it technically doesn't save you any acid, but it does save you the time and the height that it's going to go up. That's the advantage to it, is that instead of the pH going to 8 in a week, the pH may go to 8 in 2 weeks. So it doesn't stop it, it slows it down. But then once it gets up there, it's going to take you twice as much acid as it normally takes to get it back down.
And I think that's something that they should know about when they add the borate product, is that it's a good idea to have the pH and alkalinity in range first, your target ranges first, before you add the borate, because then it's harder to lower it down afterwards. Is that correct?
Well, and understand this too. I had a couple of calls this week from people saying, I've added a borate to my pool and it clouded my pool. What happened? And the answer is that there are 3 kinds of borate products you can add to the pool. The one that I recommend using is called boric acid. And when you add it to the pool, it will change the pH of the pool by 0.2 pH, which is barely enough to even test for. And the other thing it's going to do is lower alkalinity by about 5 parts per million, which is also not much that you can check on a test kit. So essentially, adding boric acid does nothing. When you add the other 2 products, which are sodium tetraborate pentahydrate and sodium tetraborate decahydrate, which is borax, when you add those 2 products to the pool, they will increase the pH of the pool to 9, and they will increase total alkalinity by 115 parts per million. To overcome that and get it back to where you started, in a 10,000 gallon pool, you will need 2.2 gallons of acid. And so in a 15,000 gallon pool, you need almost 3.5 gallons of acid after you've added either of those 2 products. And this is the only reason that I recommend boric acid. You put it in the pool, you're done. You put borate in the pool, now you got to put acid in there, and you got to put, it's okay to put the acid in at the same time as the borate. So you won't have to waste any time, but you're going to need 3.3 gallons in a 15,000 gallon pool if you've added 50 parts per million of sodium tetraborate pentahydrate.
Yeah, so the best method would be to have the pH and alkalinity within the target range and then use boric acid.
Right. And the reason that this guy had a problem was that he had high pH and alkalinity and added the borate product on top of that. And he literally precipitated out some calcium out of the pool.
That's
Because that made his alkalinity about 220 or 230, and his calcium was already about 400, and his pH was 8. And if you put that on an LSI, you're going to see it's like 1.2 or something. It's a big number. So the calcium actually came right out of the water.
And so I think the key takeaway is once you add the borates to the pool, lowering the pH and alkalinity will take more muriatic acid if that's the one you use versus before. But then the rise in pH is not going to be as dramatic. So if you had a pool, like I'll use my pool as an example. I have a saltwater generator. Before I put the borates in several years ago, it would be at 8 all the time, almost every week. Even after I added acid, a couple of days later, it'd be up at 8 again. And now with the borates in there, I'm hovering around 7.6, 7.8 all the time. And I add acid maybe once every week, or when I remember, I should say, because my pool is pretty neglected. The cobbler son has no shoes,
Of course.
But I check it every. I have an app. I have actually 3 of the smart monitors in my pool because I'm testing those out.
Right.
And so I check my pH every day because it's on my phone, and I can tell you it doesn't move from 7.8 all week long. It just stays there pretty consistently, which before it didn't. So the benefit, I think, of the borate far outweighs any kind of extra muriatic acid you're going to use to lower it, I think.
Well, that's the big advantage, is it doesn't go up as fast or as high. It'll take you a little more acid to get it back down once it gets up there, but I think it is a benefit.
Yeah, I just pulled it up on my phone here. It's 7.9 right now today, and I added acid on 5 days ago. So it hasn't gone up much in a week, you know? And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description. The magic level of borates, this goes back and forth, and I know I mentioned to you before that if you buy a pre-manufactured borate product, the manufacturer has on the label 35 parts per million is their level that they recommend, but that's not the level that you recommend.
No, and it's not the level that's very effective, to be honest with you. I think that 50 parts per million is the effective range. But there is an obscure detail from EPA, and they ran a test and did a bunch of things and produced a 115-page report, and ultimately had said that they wouldn't have any problem with 30 parts per million with a no level of concern, a NOLA, of 150%. So when you take 30 parts per million times a 1.5, you come up with 45. So EPA is saying that it's okay to have 45, but there isn't anything that's going to measure 45. So they agreed that 50 was okay. So 50 is what basically EPA is saying is okay. And that level is still with a level of concern, which is different than the other one, a level of concern of like 6 times. So you could actually keep a whole lot more in there and not have a problem, any serious problem. People sometimes read that NOLA method and come up and say, well, yeah, okay, then we shouldn't be recommending more than what EPA says. So from a legal standpoint, they're telling you that 35 parts per million is what you need in your pool because that's under the EPA maximum. So, EPA also has a maximum of 100 parts per million on citric acid. And you see what we do to that. There is an obscure maximum level of borate in the pool at 50. And I sometimes, with a chlorine generator, recommend a level of 70. And in the original patent that John Gervin got on using borate in water using it in pools in 1984, his patent says that borate at 50 parts per million is an effective algistat. And he actually went on farther and found that 200 parts per million of borate in the water is an algicide, but they didn't want to recommend 200 parts per million of borate in the pool as an algicide. So 50 is in there as a preventative, as an algistat. At any rate, it's effective, and 50 is an okay level. And the folks that you and I both know over at Trouble Free Pools and Richard Falk have been recommending 50 parts per million of borate for probably almost 15 years. I think Ben Powell and those guys over there at Trouble Free Pools first started mentioning using borates in pools in 2007. That would be 14 years ago. I'm recommending myself for 8 years in my publication.
And you mentioned 70 parts per million in the saltwater generator pool. What's the reasoning behind that level?
Well, it's actually just field reports from guys that I trust their knowledge. A couple of guys that have attended my classes have said, I'm a service tech. I got 50% of my pools on borates and chlorine generators, and we're finding that 70 works better than 50. It's just field reports, and obviously because of the patent and the data that's behind the patent, because they did a test at a university using borates, and they did find that at 200 it is an algicide. So the higher you go, obviously the better it is. It's just how much do you want to put in there until you think it's safe or whatever. So I think 70 is the maximum I would ever recommend, but I think 70 is a good thing for a chlorine generator pool. I also think that 70 parts per million of cyanuric acid is the right level for a chlorine generator pool too. And the reason is that most of the time, when you have that chlorine generator set on maximum and is pumping out chlorine, it's making more chlorine than there is cyanuric acid near the point of where it's being made in the cell. And so then you have chlorine that's unattached to cyanuric acid getting back into the pool. And it's being dispensed close to the surface of the pool where sunlight degradation is huge. At the surface of the pool, chlorine degradation is 90% in 2 hours. So you can lose a significant amount of chlorine if it's being unattached at the level at the surface of the pool, if you don't have enough cyanuric acid in the water. So we found that 70 is better for cyanuric acid with a chlorine generator pool.
That's interesting. I think you mentioned that before, and explaining it like that again, I think it makes a lot of sense that the way it generates it is the reason why you want to have a higher cyanuric acid level.
You want all of the chlorine that's being made to be attached to cyanuric acid before it gets to the pool.
And then the borate testing for borates is one of probably the biggest hurdles that people face. Currently, there's the test strips that you can get, and then there is the Spin Touch. They have a disc that does borates also. But besides that, I haven't heard of many other tests for borates in the water.
There isn't. There is a method that I researched and found a method, but nobody ever commercialized it. There was a method that was created, but it wasn't very easy to do, and nobody thought that they needed borate done that much, so it didn't become a priority with any of the test kit companies. But the technology for making a test strip was there, and it's easier to make the strip now because practically every manufacturer already makes a strip.
And then mathematically, though, you can pretty much calculate how much borate's in the water based on the gallons of the pool and how much you add. Is that kind of correct?
Yeah, that's how we recommend adding it is, we list the amount of ounces you need for the part per million of borate that you want in the pool. It's like 7.6 parts per million of ounces for each 1 part per million of borate in 10,000 gallons. So you just multiply 7.6 times 50, and that gives you the parts per the amount you need in a 10,000 gallon pool. And then you can multiply that times whatever gallons you have in your pool. So the numbers are pretty easy to come up with. You need 9 ounces for sodium tetraborate pentahydrate and 11 ounces for the decahydrate. So
and how do you remember all this stuff off the top of your head? Because you're not looking at any notes right now.
My mind works like a computer, and once the information goes in, it stays there. I don't have an eidetic memory, but I think it's probably close. I just remember things like that because I remember numbers and amounts, and they just float around for me.
So I wonder if you go to Vegas, you can count cards at blackjack.
I looked into doing that once, but then I don't know, I guess with facial recognition, they can see your eyes rolling back and that you're counting. So.
Yeah, like the MIT guys that had the little calculator in their shoe, they were able to count the cards. You do it all in your head, which is pretty amazing. I think one thing we should emphasize too is that once you add the borates to the pool, it's kind of like cyanuric acid where it doesn't evaporate out of there, or salt when you add the salt to the pool. And so the following season, you don't need to add, 20 or 30 pounds of the boric acid again, because most of that should still be in the water, right?
Yeah, it only, as I said before, it only reduces when there's a water loss. So it only reduces when you've got a leak, splash out, drag out, something like that, because it doesn't evaporate, so it stays there. So it may go down 5 or 10 ppm over a whole season.
Which is not a lot because then you can just recharge it the following season. And I
Yeah,
think what I tell pool pros this all the time, when you sell this to your customers, make sure you let them know that this is not a yearly thing that's going to have to be added every year. In most cases,
right.
you just have to add a maintenance dose. So at that point, it's an easy sell once you tell the customer that it's not a yearly kind of thing. So I'm all for borates. I think that, although they're not a magic pill, they're not magic in any way.
And people ask me, well, what does it do? And basically, it does two things. It prevents algae and it keeps the pH up from going up so fast and so high. And that's
Yeah.
all it does. And if you're expecting it to do more, it doesn't do anything.
I guess one last thing it can do is add a little sparkle to the water.
It does do that. We have reports of people saying the water feels silkier, it sparkles more, it looks bluer. I've got a video that John Stankus did that shows him putting the borate in the pool, and on his video you can see the water look different.
And if you're looking for other podcasts, you can, of course, find those on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. If you go there, just click on the podcast icon on the top. That'll take you to a drop-down menu where I have over 1,800 podcasts for you. And if you're also interested in the coaching program, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week. God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.